What's going on, everybody? My name's Joshua Garcia, and today we're talking about fruit additions and how to best get those flavors into your homebrew. Throughout your homebrew journey, at some point or another, you're going to want to put an outside flavor into your beer. You know, even if it's not fruit, it's got to be something. We all kind of get to that point where maybe we've gotten really good at making a certain style, and now we're looking to make it our own by just introducing something different that really puts our signature on it. Or maybe we're not a fan of a certain style, and it's hard to gain a like for that style, but by adding another flavor that we enjoy, we create something that we actually very much like. So no matter the reason, adding fruit into your beer is a great way to just express your own personality, have some creativity in the process, and just be yourself. Take a chance and do something different. Now, there's a couple different questions that we should answer when it comes to how to best introduce a new flavor into our homebrew, and maybe just a couple different ways to consider doing it and what might work best for you. First question we're going to answer is, at what point do we put our additional flavor into our homebrew? You know, at what step in our homebrew process, in the fermentation process, are we going to be adding those flavors? And there's really technically one best option and a few others to consider depending on what you're going to be doing. So the first one that we'll go over, which is definitely not the best one, but we're just going in order here, is in the mash. Now, while it would be kind of convenient to just throw your fruit or flavoring in the mash and let it sit and then have that flavor introduced and just sort of filtered out with the grain, it's then going to go through a 60-minute brew cycle, and not to mention fermentation. So whatever flavor you're throwing in there is going to alter immensely. And the only flavor that really does this process is pumpkin ale. So that seems to be the general consensus. Do not add anything to the mash unless it's a pumpkin ale. Option number 2 is going to be the Wort Boil, and this kind of suffers from that same issue, is that you're going to have to boil whatever you're adding in there. And you can throw it in at the end so you're not boiling it for 60 minutes, which can severely change the flavor, but it's still bringing it to a boil. So I don't really recommend this for the more sugary additives, but this is great for spices. You know, if you're throwing in cinnamon sticks or cloves, you know, those aren't going to change too much. So putting them in at the end of the boil can really help those flavors and extracting the most flavor from them. Third option is going to be in the primary fermentation vessel. And this is another one that I would say just don't do it entirely. There might be a couple niche flavors that do well in the primary fermenter, but throughout the primary fermentation, you're converting sugar into alcohol. So if your secondary flavor has any sort of sugars in it, those are going to be converted and your flavor is going to change drastically. It's not going to taste like that fresh flavor that you're looking for. The other downside is that you're working with a very vulnerable, fresh, new wort, and adding any sort of secondary flavor that you don't have the ability to sanitize properly could introduce bacteria and put you into a world of trouble. So the final option, and probably the best, especially for fruit flavors, is going to be your secondary fermentation vessel. And the great thing about adding fruit at the secondary fermenter is that the yeast activity has really calmed down, so it's not going to be messing with the flavors that you're adding at that time. Once you see your final gravity get in range, or just the bubbles on your fermenter really start to slow down, you'll know that you're ready to add the fruit. Of course, we do still have the fear of there being bacteria on whatever we're adding to the beer. Now, we are a lot safer than if we're adding to primary because fermentation has already finished. And so we have what's called green beer, which is, it's beer. It's got alcohol in it. That alcohol is going to help guard against any new bacteria that gets introduced. However, it doesn't make it invincible. So you're going to want to try and cut down on bacteria that could potentially be introduced into your wort, but at least you know you have a bit of a line of defense against something being introduced. Now, the next question we want to answer is, in what form should our fruit be in when we add it into our beer? And this one's not as black and white as the last question because there's different options. Each one has their upsides, downsides, and however you want to do it is kind of up to you. The first one is going to be fruit extracts, or just extract flavoring in general. This one is extremely convenient because it's most likely going to be sterile coming out of the bottle. There's no pulp or any sort of filtration thing that you need to get out of it. As far as the flavor extracts go, you can even add it right before you bottle because there's really no reason to let it sit and marinate in the flavor. It's good to go as soon as you add it in. However, the biggest drawback is that it's an extract and therefore tastes pretty artificial most of the time. So for most cases, you're probably not going to go with extract, but if you find a flavor that you like and you enjoy it in your beer, this could be a nice, convenient thing to do. And, you know, I wouldn't say take it to competition, but if you like it and you drink it, then by all means. The next option is to do something like a fruit juice or pureed fruit from like a can or something like that. And this is going to be a good option for convenience again, because the product will already be sanitary coming out of its container. And especially in the way of like juice, once you mix it in, the flavor's just there. It's ready to go. There's no need to wait for anything to soak or get mixed in. However, the downside here is that you do have to be careful because if there's a lot of added sugar or just the sugariness of these fruit drinks and things like that normally are, it could create a very sweet final product, or that extra sugar could contribute to your priming sugar and your CO2 in the bottles and create a overly carbonated product. So again, I would say this is something to probably avoid most of the time, but for convenience sake, or you just have an idea that you think will work out, it could be worth a shot. Third thing on my list is frozen fruit. Now, the nice thing about frozen fruit is that it keeps for a long period of time and you can buy it in bulk, keeping it in the freezer, and that's a pretty budget-friendly thing to do, especially if you plan to add it to multiple batches. Another good upside is that the skin and just overall structure of the fruit has been broken down through the freezing process, so the flavor gets extracted really easily once it's soaking in your secondary fermenter. The biggest downside I can see with frozen fruit is that a lot of times they have preservatives added to them to keep them fresher for longer. So you really got to be careful to make sure there's no preservatives inside of that frozen fruit bag, because that can very much damage your beer. And past that, it's just going to be personal preference. A lot of people will say that frozen fruit just does not taste as fresh, and therefore they avoid it. And of course, the final and most popular option here is going to be fresh fruit itself. This allows you to pick pretty much anything you want. You go to the grocery store and pick out any sort of fruit or flavoring, cut it up, and soak it into your beer for that flavor. You're going to be getting the freshest taste, the best aroma, and probably a bit of color if you choose something that has a lot of color to it. So for this video, I did make a beer to add some fruit to. What I did was I brewed a 4-gallon batch of kind of a Sierra Nevada clone. It's not exactly, but it tastes a lot like Sierra Nevada. And then I took those 4 gallons and I split it into two 2-gallon secondary fermenters. And for one of them, I added about 1.5 pounds of mango and orange peel. And then the other one, I added about 12 ounces of raspberry, which I pureed in a little bit of vodka just to make sure it was completely sanitary, and added those into the fermenter. The nice thing about the mango and the orange peel was I was able to put it into a mesh bag and just submerge it into the fermenter and then leave it. After the fermentation was done, it was super easy to just pull that out and go straight to bottle. There wasn't much residue left over or anything to filter out. I did still filter it, but there wasn't that much. With the raspberry, because it was all pulped out from being blended, I just added it straight into the fermenter. Now this created a great way of getting a lot of flavor out of that just 12 ounces of raspberry, but what it also did was created a lot of pulp that needed to be filtered out, and even filtering through 2 different strainers, the beer still has quite a bit of sediment at the bottom of the bottles. Another weird thing is that the raspberry ale kind of lost its color in the bottling process. You see it in the fermenter and it's got a bunch of red from the raspberry, and I thought it would keep that color through carbonation. But when I went and poured the first bottle, I literally thought I had mislabeled it because it came out that yellowish of the standard pale ale. To my surprise, something in the carbonation process just caused it to lose that red pigmentation. So the mango one was the clear winner for me. That subtler flavor really paired well with the pale ale. And the raspberry I just thought was a little bit too intense. So pureeing and juicing was just too much flavor. But even in the end, if you don't get exactly what you're going for, adding fruit to beer is still a fun way to just sort of experiment and get something different. And hopefully you'll learn something and be able to get exactly what you're going for the second time around. But the product is usually a very much enjoyable and drinkable final result. All right, that's it for me. I hope you found this enjoyable and that you're going to go out and try your own flavor addition, and whatever style you choose, whatever flavor you're going to be adding and how you're going to add it, I'd love to see it down in the comments, and just see what you guys come up with. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.